Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The crimson hue of the Ross family crest, a blood-red rose, loomed over the grand ballroom, casting an air of foreboding across the room. Guests, adorned in the finest silks and jewels, danced and conversed, their laughter echoing off the marble wall. Yet beneath the shimmering chandeliers, a different kind of dance was taking place, one of power, control, and subtle manipulation. Catherine Ross, heir to the Ross family fortune, stood near the edge of the room, a glass of wine in hand. Her long, dark curls framed her face, and her emerald eyes scanned the crowd with precision. She had mastered the art of blending in, of pretending to be a part of the world she so despised. Tonight she was just another noblewoman, smiling and nodding at the empty compliments thrown her way. But beneath the surface, a storm brewed within her. The blood-red rose had been the emblem of her family for centuries. It symbolized their ruthlessness, their willingness to crush anyone who stood in their way. The Ross family had built their empire through violence, manipulation, and fear, and Catherine had grown up surrounded by the spoils of that cruelty. She had watched her father, Lord Marcus Ross, orchestrate wars and executions without a second thought, all in the name of preserving their power. But Catherine was different. She had never shared her father's thirst for dominance. The violence that had sustained her family for generations repulsed her, and for years she had silently plotted to change the course of her family, some fate. She wanted to end the bloodshed, to bring justice to the people who had suffered under the Ross family's rule. Tonight, as the nobles danced and feasted, Catherine's mind was already far from the revelry. She had spent months gathering allies within the court, those who, like her, were dissatisfied with the kingdom's current power structure. It had not been easy. Trust was a rare commodity in the palace, and betrayal lurked behind every corner. But Catherine was patient. She knew how to play the game. "Lady Catherine, you look lost in thought." The voice broke through her reverie. She turned to see Sir Alistair, a knight who had once been a loyal servant of her father. But like her, he had grown disillusioned with the Ross family, the cruelty. He was one of her most trusted allies, though even with him, she was cautious. "Just admiring the evening," Catherine replied smoothly, offering him a practiced smile. Alistair's gray eyes scanned the room before he leaned in closer. "Everything is in place, the guards are ready, and the nobles who support us are positioned. All we need is your signal." Catherine's heart quickened. She had known this moment would come, but now that it was here, the weight of it settled heavily on her shoulder. She had spent years preparing for this, plotting, scheming, waiting for the perfect opportunity to overthrow her father and end his reign of terror. But the reality of what she was about to do still gnawed at her. She would be betraying her family, she would be plunging the kingdom into chaos, and if she failed, the consequences would be dire. Still she nodded, her resolve hardening. Good, we'll move when the time is right." As Alistair melted back into the crowd, Catherine allowed herself a moment to breathe. The room seemed smaller, the air thicker. Her father stood across the room, laughing with a group of courtiers, his booming voice carrying over the music. He looked every bit the powerful lord, tall, broad-shouldered, his graying hair tied back in a neat queue. To the outside world, he was a man to be admired, respected, feared. To Catherine, he was a tyrant, and tonight his reign would end. The execution had been the final straw. A week ago, Lord Marcus had ordered the public execution of a dozen commoners accused of treason, their crime protesting the high taxes imposed by the nobility. Catherine had watched in horror as the prisoners were paraded through the streets, their faces gaunt and bruised from the tortures they had endured. She had tried to reason with her father to convince him to show mercy, but he had dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "Mercy is for the weak," he had said, his voice as cold as the steel of the executioner's sag. Blade. Catherine had known then that there was no saving him. He was too far gone, too consumed by his lust for power. The only way to stop him was to take everything from him. And so she had accelerated her plan. The rebellion had been simmering beneath the surface for years, but now it was ready to boil over. Catherine had gathered allies from all corners of the kingdom, nobles who had grown tired of the Ross family's tyranny, soldiers who were loyal to her rather than her father, and even commoners who were willing to fight for a chance at a better life. It would not be easy. Lord Marcus was a formidable opponent, and his loyalists were still numerous. But Catherine had something her father lacked: vision. She did just want to overthrow him. She wanted to rebuild the kingdom, to create a new order where justice and fairness ruled, not fear and cruelty. But before that could happen, the coup had to succeed. The night of the coup arrived with a sense of quiet anticipation. The grand ball was in full swing, and the palace was filled with the sound of music and laughter. Catherine moved through the crowd, her every step calculated. She exchanged pleasantries with the courtiers, smiled at the sycophants who fawned over her, and all the while she kept a careful eye on her father. Lord Marcus was in his element, holding court with a group of nobles, his booming laughter rising above the music. He was oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. Catherine's heart pounded in her chest as she made her way to the balcony, where Sir Alistair was waiting. The knight's expression was tense, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "Are you ready, Alistair?" asked his voice low. Catherine nodded.
It's time.
With a swift motion, she signaled to the guards stationed at the door. They moved into position, their expressions grim as they prepared to close off the exit. The nobles, still unaware of what was happening, continued to dance and drink, their laughter echoing through the hall. Catherine turned back to Alistair.
"We move now."
Alistair gave a curt nod and disappeared into the shadows, ready to lead the soldiers in the assault. Catherine watched him go, her stomach churning with a mix of anticipation and dread. She had planned for every possible outcome, but there was no way to predict how her father would react when the coup began. As she re-entered the ballroom, her eyes met her father's cell across the room. He was watching her, his expression unreadable for a moment. She wondered if he knew, if he could sense the betrayal hanging in the air like a storm cloud. But then he turned away, laughing with the nobles around him, and Catherine felt a surge of anger. He was so confident in his power, so sure of his control over the kingdom. He had no idea how close he was to losing everything. Catherine took a deep breath and strode toward the center of the room, her movements deliberate. She raised her glass, a signal to the conspirators scattered throughout the hall. "To the Ross family," she called, her voice ringing out over the music. "Dire, may its legacy endure forever." The nobles cheered, raising their glasses in response, oblivious to the irony of her word. As they drank, Catherine's eyes flicked to the guards at the doors. The time had come. The doors slammed shut with a deafening thud, and the music stopped abruptly. A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd as they realized something was wrong. Lord Marcus turned toward the sound, his brow furrowed. "Siri, what is the meaning of this?" "Terry," he demanded, his voice cutting through the growing tension. Catherine stepped forward, her heart pounding in her chest. Her father died. For a moment there was silence. Then Lord Marcus laughed, a low, dangerous sound that sent a chill down Catherine's spine. "You think you can challenge me?" he sneered, his eyes blazing with fury. "Terry, you think you can overthrow me, girl?" Catherine's grip tightened on the hilt of the dagger hidden beneath her gown. "Terry, I don't think, father. I know." The room erupted into chaos. Nobles screamed as the palace guards, now loyal to Catherine, stormed the ballroom. Swords clashed, and the once elegant hall became a battlefield. Catherine's allies moved swiftly, cutting down the loyalists who tried to defend her father. Lord Marcus stood in the center of the room, his face a mask of rage. He drew his sword, the steel gleaming in the dim light. "Hallo, traitor." Terry roared, charging toward Catherine. Catherine barely had time to draw her own blade before her father was upon her. The force of his attack sent her stumbling backward, her arms training under the weight of his blow. He was stronger than she had anticipated, and his strikes were precise, deadly. "You are a fool, Catherine." Lord Marcus snarled, his sword crashing against her. "You think you can change this kingdom? You think you can rule?" Catherine gritted her teeth, parrying another blow. "Trick it." "Dante, want to rule?" she hissed, her voice strained. "Tara, I want to end your reign of terror." Lord Marcus' eyes blazed with fury, and for a moment, Catherine saw something flicker behind his gaze, doubt, perhaps of fear. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the cold determination that had always defined him. "You will die for this," he growled, his sword slicing through the air. Catherine dodged, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had trained for this moment, but nothing could have prepared her for the raw intensity of facing her father in combat. Every strike felt personal, every blow a reminder of the years of suffering he had inflicted on the kingdom. But Catherine was not fighting for herself, she was fighting for the people who had been crushed under her family. It's a rule for the commoners, who had been executed for daring to speak out against the nobility, for the allies who had risked everything to stand by her side. And she would not let them down. With a surge of strength, Catherine countered her father, Senec's attack, driving her blade toward him with a precision born of desperation. Lord Marcus staggered, a grunt of pain escaping his lips as her sword sliced across his arm. "You've grown weak," he spat, clutching the wound, "frayed just like your mother." The mention of her mother, a woman who had died under mysterious circumstances when Catherine was a child, sent a wave of cold fury through her. She'd never known the truth about her mother's death, but she had always suspected her father had been involved. "Don't you dare speak of her," Catherine snarled, her voice low and dangerous. Lord Marcus laughed, though there was a hint of unease in his eye. "She was a fool just like you. She thought she could change me too, but in the end, she learned her place." Catherine's vision blurred with rage. She had always suspected her father's involvement in her mother's death, but hearing him speak of it so callously confirmed her worst fear. "You killed her," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Lord Marcus sneered. "She was weak just like you. Just like..." With a scream of fury, Catherine lunged at her father, her blade flashing in the dim light. The force of her attack caught him off guard, and for the first time he stumbled, his confidence faltering. "You were wrong." Catherine hissed, her sword pressing against his throat. "There I am, nothing like her, and I will end this." Lord Marcus' eyes widened as he felt the cold steel of Catherine's blade press against his throat. For the first time in her life, Catherine saw true fear in her father's sun gaze. The man who had ruled with an iron fist, who had crushed rebellions and silenced dissent with ease, was now at her mercy. His hands trembled as he struggled to maintain his composure, the proud, defiant mask slipping away to reveal the fragility beneath. "You were making a mistake," he rasped, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You don't know what you were doing, Catherine. You will destroy everything." Catherine's grip on the sword tightened, but she didn't stray away. The weight of everything she had endured, every act of cruelty she had witnessed, every injustice her family had perpetrated pressed down on her like a tidal wave. She could end it all now with one swift stroke, one final act of defiance. But as she stood there, her father's sight hanging in the balance, something held her back. Her breath came in shallow gasps as her mind raced. She had planned for this moment, had dreamed of it for years, but now that it was here, a gnawing doubt crept into her thought. Would killing him truly change anything? Would it undo the years of suffering her family had caused, or would it only plunge the kingdom into further chaos, leaving a vacuum for another tyrant to fill? Lord Marcus' voice, though weakened, was laced with venom. "Drown. You read just like me. No matter how much you pretend otherwise, Catherine, you were willing to spill blood for power. You'll never be free of it." The words hit her like a blow. She had sworn to be different, to be better than him. But now, standing over him with a blade at his throat, she wondered if he was right. Was she becoming the very thing she despised? The ballroom had fallen eerily silent. The clashing of swords and shouts of battle had faded, leaving only the sound of Catherine's ragged breathing. Her allies had overpowered the loyalists, and the nobles who had once cheered for her father now watched in stunned silence, unsure of what would come next. Sir Alistair approached cautiously, his sword still drawn but his expression concerned. "A second dress," he said softly. "Set star ever you vest over me." Catherine didn't move. Her eyes were locked on her father, his once imposing figure now crumpled and broken before her. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, threatening to crush her. The world seemed to narrow to this one moment, this one choice that would define the rest of her life. "You think you read different," Lord Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. "Sire, but you read not. You will always be a Ross. You'll always be..." Catherine's blade flashed and a sharp gasp echoed through the room. But she didn't strike his throat. Instead, she had sliced through his arm, disarming him completely and sending his sword clattering to the ground. Lord Marcus howled in pain, clutching the wound, but Catherine stepped back, lowering her blade. "I am not like you," she said quietly, her voice steady. "I want to let you define me anymore." Her father glared at her through the haze of pain, his face twisted in fury, but he said nothing more. Catherine turned her back on him, a symbolic gesture of her final rejection. She had spared his life, but he was no longer a threat to her or the kingdom. His power had been stripped away not by her sword, but by her refusal to play his game. Sir Alistair sheathed his sword and moved to her side. "What will you do with him?" Catherine looked back at the broken man who had once been her father. "Imprison him," she said, her voice firm. "Till this, but he'll never rule again." As the guards moved to take Lord Marcus into custody, Catherine felt a strange sense of release, as though a weight she hadn't realized she had been carrying had been lifted from her shoulders. She had won, but not in the way her father had expected. She had chosen a different path, one that would lead the kingdom not to more bloodshed, but to something better. The ballroom was still filled with nobles, their eyes wide with shock and uncertainty. Catherine knew that this was just the beginning. The real work would come now, rebuilding a kingdom that had been ravaged by years of corruption and fear. It would be slow, it would be difficult, but she was ready for the challenge. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, addressing the room. "The Ross family's reign of terror is over. Heroines," she declared, her voice ringing with Albert. "But this kingdom is not mine to rule alone. It belongs to all of us. From this day forward, we will create a council to govern, a council of nobles, commoners, and scholars. We will rebuild, not with fear, but with justice." There was a stunned silence, and then slowly, one by one, the nobles began to bow their heads in respect. It was a small gesture, but it was a start. Catherine knew that earning their trust would take time, but for now, this was enough. As the room emptied and the echoes of the battle faded, Catherine found herself standing alone in the center of the ballroom. The crimson rose still loomed above her, a symbol of everything her family had been, but it no longer held power over her. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Lord Marcus had been imprisoned in the deepest cell of the royal dungeons, and Catherine had begun the process of dismantling the corrupt systems that had kept him in power for so long. She appointed members of the council, carefully choosing those who had proven their loyalty to the kingdom and not just to her family. Sir Alistair became her most trusted advisor, his steady presence a comfort in the chaotic aftermath of the coup. Together they worked to restore order to the kingdom, repairing the damage done by years of misrule. But not everyone was so easily swayed. There were still those loyal to the old ways, those who whispered in the shadows, plotting to undermine Catherine's self-reform. She knew that her father's influence still lingered, like a poison in the veins of the court, and it would take time to root it out completely. One evening, as Catherine walked through the gardens of the Ross estate, she paused before the rose bushes. The blood-red roses, so long a symbol of her family, so cruelty, were in full bloom. Their deep, rich color seemed to mock her, a reminder of the legacy she was trying to escape. But Catherine was no longer afraid of the rose. She reached down and plucked one from the bush, wincing as the thorns pricked her fingers. She studied it for a moment, then, with a decisive twist, she broke the stem and let the rose fall to the ground. It landed in the dirt, its petals scattering. Catherine smiled softly. The rose, for all its beauty, was just a flower. It held no power over her anymore. "Are you ready, Sir Alistair?" Suis came from behind her. Catherine turned to see him standing at the edge of the garden, his expression serious but warm. She nodded. "Thierry, I am ready." Together, they walked back to the palace, where the new council was waiting for her. There was much to be done, and Catherine knew that the road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time in her life, she felt the sense of hope. She had freed herself from her father's sand shadow, and now she was ready to build something new. As they entered the council chambers, Catherine took her seat at the head of the table. The nobles and commoners who had gathered there looked to her, not with fear but with respect. It was a small victory, but it was a victory, nonetheless. And as Catherine gazed out at the faces around her, she knew that the blood-red rose, once a symbol of fear and cruelty, had withered. In its place, something new would bloom, something built on justice, on hope, on the belief that the kingdom could be better. Catherine smiled, her heart light as she spoke the words that would shape the future.